Now, the next aspect of our live stream is going to be a more anthropological study of how the different Vedas have conveyed the deity that we're talking about. I'm very excited about this one because I always love reading about the sages in the Vedas. Brihaspati is this classical figure in the Vedas. Like I said, it's probably because I'm Jesta moon, so I'm Indra, and I admire and revere the consciousness of Brihaspati and the sages. They have this special embodied wisdom of Shiva and Vishnu in reality that is so special for all of us, and we're going to learn what they're all about, what their roots are in the Vedas from our next reading. This is a book called The Divine Forces of the Lunar Nakshatras as Portrayed in the Vedas. This is by this lady who's an author named Radha. I think she's a great researcher. And something I always like to say is that, in particular, the way she does her research is she is a sidereal practitioner. So she really gets into the guts of the Vedas. And the Vedas stretch far beyond, again, zodiac and the signs. And she honors that. But there are times when we have to question whether she makes a statement about the nakshatra that could be coming from the distortion that we've talked about previously. I always have to give this caveat because she is a sidereal practitioner. Usually, such things only happen when she talks at the end about her interpolations of planets inside the nakshatra. But throughout her talking about the deity Brihaspati, it's all pure Vedic stuff. It's always on point. So I invite you to join me as we go through the second part of this podcast in order to learn about the benevolent character of Brihaspati and the sages as they're conveyed in the Vedas. Now, before we do, of course, I would again like to bring to everyone's attention, this is a little summary of the nakshatra devatas. And as we can see, most of the nakshatras are grouped into three groupings. We have the Vasus, which are, if you've ever heard of the Gayatri mantra, it's the most special and revered mantra in Vedic literature. Don't take my word for it. If you look it up, you will find that this is eternally the case. And how it starts is Om, which contains all the worlds. Om, Bhu, Bhuva, Svaha, Tat Savitur Varenyam, etc., etc. Om, Boom, it's Bu, B-H-U. Bu is the earthly elemental aspects of the physical material world. It's the tamasic heavy elements. Bhuva is the atmosphere. This represents Shiva, it represents the Rudras, and it's the Rajasic element of the self-becoming. And then Swaha, and these are all lokas. Bhuloka is earth, Bhuvaloka is atmosphere, and then Swahaloka is the devas, the Adityas, that comes from Aditi, who birthed them in this eternal span of numerological wisdom that pervades every galaxy, wherever human beings are birthed from the mantle of Earth, because the planet is far enough and yet close enough to the sun to have water that can grow biological life, that can evolve from plants into animals, into bugs, into mammals, into humans. All humanity will always blow the dust off the same old book of eternal pervading wisdom that is Sanskrit, that is the Vedas. The Adityas are archetypal aspects of the unconscious that are connected to the higher spheres of spiritual evolution. They're all pervading. And so these are what the nakshatras are conveying. The Adityas have a universal nature on every planet. So do the Rudras, and so do the Vasus. Now, these are the three main groupings of the nakshatras, but there are other nakshatras of only a few who are not contained in this grouping, and Pushya is one of them. We have the Vishvadevas, we have Prajapati, which is Brahma, we have the Pitris, which is ruled by Magha, and that's like our ancestors, and that's its own whole trippy thing, which I can't wait to get to. I think that might be next, Magha. And Brihaspati is Pushya, the eternal, natural embodiment of wisdom, which the sages represent. It's not one of those three worlds. It's something that pervades them. Pushya is one of those nakshatras. Really, I should say Brihaspati is the one deity that is conveyed as being beyond those three worlds. One of the deities. And that is what we are talking about next. Now, this book has sections, and this section is chapter 7. There is, in the beginning of the book, we have the birth of the gods and creation of the worlds. That is Agni. Then next we have the creation story of Prajapati through Rohini. Then we have the Vishvadevas, which is Uttara Ashada, which is going to come way later in the series. But it's the 33 divine forces. Uttara Ashada is like all of the nakshatras combined into one in a certain way. And then chapter 7, after all of the Vishvadevas are manifested, we have Brihaspati, which is Pushya. It's the lord of the holy power of Brahman. Let's start rolling through. Of course, as we know, this is coming from the Divine Forces of the Lunar Nakshatras by the author Radha. We're going to begin now, chapter 7, the chapter on Brihaspati Pushya, Lord of the holy power of Brahman. And keep in mind, everybody, if you're interested, at the end of this, we're going to do her idea of interpreting planets falling into Pushya. Now, the first quote that we read is coming from the Rig Veda, Mandala 4, chapter 50, verse 1. Brihaspati, who with his conquering force, with his cry, has propped apart the ends of the earth, the founder of the triple togetherness. Him with his rapturous tongue, the ancient seers, the sages, have by their shining mediations established in front. Interesting. The first chapter that we get into is Brihaspati's faculty of Brahmavarkasa. Now, in the Puranic era, because we know that, the Rig Veda is the most ancient that there is. There is the Rig Veda, and then there's other Vedas, ending typically with the Krishna Yajur Veda. Then from there, we had Brahmanas, which were commentaries on the Vedas. We also had the Upanishads, and then the later end of things, the Puranas are like the New Testament of the Vedas. Everything before it is kind of like Old Testament stuff. The Puranas are like the New Testament, which a lot of people say, since they're newer, they're less in the flow of Vedic reckoning. That is typically Veda. Here we go. We had a bit of a skip in our thing there. Let me know if the audio goes off from the. Let me know if the audio ever goes off from the visuals, if you could, folks, because then I could reset it and bring it back. So the Puranic era is kind of like later, really like 0 AD-ish, and even possibly even later. There's some, I think, that were written. That's about it, though, around that time, which is very recent compared to how far back a lot of the Vedas go. Now, in the Puranic era, Brihaspati's characterization is manifold. He is the lord of speech, Vakaspati, and the priest, Purohita, to the gods, as well as Indra's guru and the overseer of the priestly Brahmin caste. Thank you, Mary. Now, Brihaspati is the priest of the gods, as well as Indra's guru. And Brihaspati is the overseer of the priestly Brahmin caste. Brihaspati is even cast as the wise and generous planet Jupiter. And this is in the Puranas. Now, in very much contrast is Brihaspati's role in the Rig Veda, which is best illustrated by the true meaning of his Sanskrit name. Paraphrased in the later Vedas as Lord of Mantra or Prayer, the term Brihaspati is more profoundly interpreted by Sri Aurobindo. Its verb root is brih, as in Brahman. Aurobindo comments that Brahman implies the expression of the heart or soul, as distinguished from an expression of the thought of a thought in the mind, which the latter term he refers to as mantra. Cool. That comes from his book called The Secret of the Veda, which I kind of feel like I would love to digest reading this. Now, elaborating on this theme, Sri Aurobindo describes Brahman as luminous intelligence, manisha, and wisdom fashioned by the heart. That's hridaya. Comes from the same book. Others define the term as the craving and fullness of the soul and striving towards the gods. The word given here is Trividyam. Now, this is the notion intended by Brihaspati's Vedic epithet Brahmanaspati, the Lord of Brahman. And this is a name rarely found in the Puranas. As Lord of Brahman, Brihaspati possesses Brahmavarkasa. It's the splendor and spiritual luster of inspired truth. We read in a footnote that Agni also possesses the faculty of Brahmavarkasa, and you can see that in the chapter on Agni. Now, a quote's given here from the Rig Veda. O Brihaspati, you are that which exceeds the strength of the Aryan, which shines full of light and willpower in the creatures born, which radiates with force. You are born of the truth. Establish in us that bright substance. That's from Rig Veda, Mandala 2, chapter 23. Now, in this famous Rig Vedic stanza, Rishi Gritsamada envisions Brihaspati's power of Brahmavarkasa as a brilliantly shining and conspicuous light permeating everywhere. He employs the word vipati, a term the translator has taken to mean full of light. However, vipati also means to strike the ear, implying divine revelation perceived by the ear. Divine revelation, rather, perceived by the ear. Now, we read in a footnote that the mystic revelations of the Vedic rishis are illustrious of divinely inspired Brahmavarkasa. It's little wonder that Jupiter, the graha of inspired wisdom, is exalted in Pushya. Got us! That was, so you got to understand, folks, this is an example of this author assuming that the nature of the nakshatra is somehow blended with the signs. She's noting that she says it's no coincidence that Jupiter is exalted in Cancer and that Cancer is inside of Pushya. Now, as tropical Vedic astrologers, like I am, in 12,000 years, like I said, Pushya is going to be inside of Capricorn, which means that there is no connection, in my opinion, to Cancer with Pushya. So this is one of those things that I like to speak to as we go through this. And I'm glad we did. But let's keep moving forward because, again, regardless, there is a connection of Jupiter to Brihaspati and to Pushya. So that shouldn't turn us away from what this author's descriptions of Brihaspati are. Check. I'm sure my audio is going to go off again. But oh well. Maybe we should just keep going and turn this into a podcast. Check. Hello. There we go. Yeah. So my audio is probably going to be off, but whatever. I don't want to keep restarting it every time. Thank you, Mary. I appreciate you. Now, for the attainment of sacred knowledge, the Yajamana is instructed to recite the above verse to Brihaspati. And that was the one this famous one that we just read. O Brihaspati, you are that which exceeds the strength of the Aryan, which shines full of light and willpower in the creatures born. Establish us in that bright substance. This is something that the Yajamana, which is the aspirant of the yajna, needs to say in order to invoke Brihaspati and his wisdom. Now, the Brahmanas speak of a time when earth and heaven were joined together, but later they are separated from one another, and the broad atmospheric realm takes shape in between them. Cool. Psychedelic. That's like Adam and Eve leaving the garden almost at some level, I feel. At the time of this separation, the category gods are assigned rulership of the realms. The Adityas are assigned to Swahaloka in the heavens. The Rudras are assigned to Bhuvaloka in the atmosphere. And the Vasus are assigned to Bhu, which is the earth. Heaven and earth are figuratively declared re-wedded when, instigated by the gods, rains pour down from heaven and produce food on earth. And in return, that food is offered up to heaven by way of smoke, meaning sacrificial offerings. Wow. In this way, an uninterrupted cycle of giving and receiving is established between gods and men. In this way, heaven and earth remain wedded as man and wife. Some deep wisdom being laid down here that I'm very appreciative of hearing. This book has these thunderbolts of insight. You know, the thunderbolt, the rain is a very ancient, symbolic, important signifier for heaven being wedded to earth as we're reading. You're going to hear it throughout this whole series, and you can see it within a lot of things. Vedic, but also beyond Vedic and other ancient cultures. There's always been an obsession with rains, also with the flood, and with the Gilgamesh thing, with all that rain. Even outside of the flood, rains are this magical thing that brings fertility to the earth. And this has always been something regarded as very mystical and special. We could see it anthropologically as that, the people back in the day needed food. And when it rained, they got food so they could survive. So, oh my God, it's this holy thing. We could see it at that level. But esoteric-minded people know that there is a deeper wisdom being conveyed. And this is it. I'm very glad to have read that with you all here. This grand feat, the reunification of heaven and earth, is an inner process metaphorically represented in the Brahmanic yajnas. It reflects the internal sacrifice performed by those desirous of enlightenment, i.e., union with heaven. Performing tapas, the spiritual seeker fuels the sacrificial flames residing within his spiritual heart, the abode of Brahmaspati. As Agni blazes, a loud but soundless thunderclap is perceived. The cry of the Vasat call by Brahmaspati. The Vasat call alerts the gods that an offering is made for their partaking. Eagerly, the gods rush to receive the oblation and the sacrifice. In return, the gods shower the Yajamana, the aspirant, with an abundance of divine plenitude. Yajamana, the sacrificer, fully integrated in all aspects of his being, awakens to a new consciousness. Check. Hopefully you guys can see. Okay, here we go. Okay, I'll say that again. The Yajamana, the sacrificer, fully integrated in all aspects of his being, awakens to a new consciousness. A single ray of light, immortal truth, now shines forth from within the brilliance of a million suns. Facilitated by Brahmaspati and his holy power of Brahman, heaven and earth are wedded together in the cave of the spiritual heart of the aspirant. Aptly, Bhatta Bhaskara states that Pushya's foundation above is the sacrificial fire. Its foundation below is the sacrificing Yajamana, and its Shakti is the power of instigating or bringing forth the desired sacrificial results. When all three come together, then the glory of Brahman is produced, i.e., an awakening to truth consciousness. Now, of course, this ought to be familiar to you guys. That was the Taittiriya Brahmana, with the commentary of somebody named Bhatta Bhaskara Mishra. And of course, we recognize this, right? The foundation above is the sacrificial fire. The foundation below is the sacrificing Yajamana. So that was this book essentially taking us through one aspect of the Vedas that we've already gone through. Now, next up, that was beautiful. This book has so many little moments where I could tell this author just gets the Vedas so succinctly. That's why we read it. You know, it's writing that I just haven't found anywhere else. Now, next up, we have the cry of Brihaspati and his band of Rikvans. Brihaspati's hallmark Rigvedic feature is his thunderous voice that penetrates the depths of the soul as it shatters the veils of ignorance. A quote from the Rig Veda reads, "Brihaspati drives utterly away the darkness that encompasses us with his cry." It's Rig Veda, Mandala 4, Chapter 50. Both his piercing cry and ecstatic tongue are vital weapons of light and truth. Joining him in exuberant chorus are the singing Rikvans, which means jubilant with praise. These are a host of divine beings who rapturously shout the Riks of the Rig Veda and have Brihaspati as their leader. Sri Aurobindo, in a footnote, the author tells us that Sri Aurobindo gives a comment on this. He says, "It cannot be doubted that by this host or troop of Brihaspati, the Shustibha, the Rigvata, and Ganena, these are meant the Angiras Rishis, who, by the true mantra, help in the great victory." Interesting. Now, the voices of these extraneous, this chorus that follows Brihaspati, their voices are likened to the sacred Hamsa, the swan. When offered milk mixed with water, this swan is capable of siphoning only the milk. The Hamsa symbolizes refined discrimination, and later on, the Hamsa, the swan, symbolizes refined discrimination, and later becomes the Puranic Vahana, the vehicle, for Sarasvati, goddess of inspired wisdom. So that's in the Puranas. You might have heard this word Hamsa from, we've seen it in the visage of, it's often used as a spiritual name for a very specific type of spiritual leader. For example, if anybody follows the lineage of Paramahansa Yogananda, I'm really into Yogananda. It's really kind of my backbone of spiritual lineage by my own discretion or whatever. Paramahamsa, that's a title that you often hear. Para means like greater or psychedelically up there, and then Hamsa is the swan. One who is born into great discrimination of wisdom as well as passion. This is the water in the milk. The milk is the nourishment that comes from Brihaspati, the spirit of wisdom. It's a mixture of wisdom and devotion, the water. And the swan can drink it, but only drink the milk and leave the water of the joy for the person, if that makes sense. That's my understanding of it. So the Hamsa is an important symbol in all of this regard. And the voices that follow Brihaspati have this swan-like quality, which is very beautiful. Brihaspati's leadership of the Brihaspati's leadership of the singing Rikvans earns him the epithet Ganapati, leader of a class or troop. We invoke you, the Lord of hosts, Ganapati, over the hosts, the seer of seers with the uppermost inspired knowledge, the greatest king of the expressive powers of the soul. It's Brahmanam. O Lord of the soul, hearing us, sit down upon the seat with your powers of expansion. Now, I knew it. I was going to say, we read a footnote. That came from Rig Veda, Mandala 2, chapter 23. And there's an important footnote here because it correlates with something I've already mentioned. In today's time, it's generally considered that the verse we just read, this Rig Vedic verse, is associated with Ganesha, the son of Parvati and Shiva. There's some part of me that correlates Ganesha as being the same, but I am not of authority to say that. So it's interesting that this author is making a dichotomy that I have to explore myself. Maybe it's possible Brihaspati is called Ganapati, and Ganesha is also called Ganapati, and that they are two different archetypes of spiritual reality sharing the same title. That's what it seems like to me. Either that or Ganesha could be a Puranic embodiment of Brihaspati. Stay tuned, because I'd like to figure that out for myself now that I'm aware of what this author's laying down here. I can't say, but we shall continue forward. Now, in the Rig Veda, Brihaspati and his chanting Rikvans assume the foremost Purohita position amongst the gods during times of battle. Guided by Brihaspati's inspired wisdom, the gods are victorious in their heroic endeavors. Arishi illuminates Brihaspati's battlefield weapons, and we hear a quote from the Rig Veda: "With his quick-shooting bow that has the dynamic truth as its string, Brahmanaspati reaches there where he wants. Effective are the arrows with which he shoots. They originate from the ear, i.e. inspired hearing, with the eye of the heroic soul for sight." That comes from Rig Veda, Mandala 2, chapter 24. There's a part of me that just can't deny that I often talk about, one of my favorite things I talk about is that Ganesha, Ganapati, Ga means the wisdom of sound, and then Na is like Narada, that represents the wisdom of light. I may have them switched, but it's amazing that Brahmanaspati, as Brihaspati here, is conveyed as the Lord of Wisdom, which permeates on top of sound and light. So, I'm going to stick to what we're reading here, because my fascination with Ganapati as being connected to Brihaspati is a side note. In the later Vedas and Puranas, Brihaspati is formally anointed spiritual preceptor and priest, Purohita, to the gods and the envoy of the priestly caste. For example, in the Yajurveda, we read a quote that says, "Brihaspati desired, 'May the gods have faith in me, and may I become their Purohita.' He saw this rite of 24 nights. He grasped it and sacrificed with it. Then the gods had faith in him, and he became their Purohita." And that comes from the Taittiriya Samhita. It's another commentary on the Vedas. Now, next up, we are reading about the defeat of Vala. The defeat of Vala and release of the cows. Now, this is a legend told in the Rig Veda. According to a legend told in the Rig Veda, the Panis, who are thieves appearing as priests, steal all the cows and conceal them in a cavern, Vala. A large stone seals its entry, which demon Vala guards. On behalf of Indra, Sarama, a mystical female dog, journeys to the cave with hopes of driving away the Panis. I come, appointed messenger of Indra, seeking your ample stores of wealth, O Panis. That's Rig Veda Mandala 10, chapter 108. The Panis toy with Sarama, claiming they will make Indra herdsman of the stolen cattle should Indra approach them. In return, Sarama threatens that Brihaspati will surely put an end to them all when he hears of their whereabouts. Even if your wicked bodies, O ye Panis, were arrow-proof, your words are weak or wounding, and were the path to you as yet unmastered, Brihaspati in neither case will spare you. That comes from Rig Veda, Mandala 10, also chapter 108. Remaining fearless, the Panis advise Sarama that her efforts are in vain. In another quote, paved with the rock is those our treasure chamber, filled full of precious things of kine and horses. These Panis, who are watchful keepers, guard it. In vain hast thou approached this lonely station. Again, that's the same Rig Veda, Mandala 10, chapter 108. Now Sadama returns home to inform the gods of her futile attempt to rescue the stolen treasure. Hearing her story, Brihaspati journeys to the cave, accompanied by his band of singing Rikvans, as does Indra, with his troop of howling Rudras, the Maruts, the atmospheric beings. Rallying to the cause, Indra slays Serpent Vala with his thunderbolt. Then Brihaspati shatters the stony entrance of the cave with his thunderous cry, bursting the stony barriers of the prison cavern. Brihaspati spake in thunder. Well, there's a metaphor here that I see building, and the footnote is giving it to me. There's a footnote here that says the Vala, or the cave, is symbolic of the heart of the spiritual aspirant, which Brihaspati breaks open with his potentized cry. Potentized cry. Brihaspati then releases the stolen cows. Seeking light amid the darkness, Brihaspati drove forth the bright cows of the heart. Very interesting. For his noble feat, Brihaspati is praised as defender and guardian of the Milch Keen. He is also lauded as Aprajita, the victorious one who roars like a lion. Released, the Milch Keen, which I believe is a band of female fertile cows, once again nourished the people of the land with milk. For his heroic efforts, Brihaspati is gifted Vishvarupa Upajata. It's a dappled cow with multi-forms. And this is a milch cow fashioned by the ingenious Ribhu brothers. And you can find more about those guys in the chapter on Chitra, also known as Tvastri, the maker of all forms. We're going to do that when we go to Chitra Nakshatra. Brihaspati's connection with milch cows affords an explanation for the name Pushya, to nourish, as his nakshatra. Pushya means to nourish, as we've described. Here, the milk is a nourishing stream of vidya, spiritual wisdom provided to the spiritual aspirant. And as I see it, of course, this is a wisdom, being spiritual, that can only come from self-realization, from the heart, which is beyond knowledge, and yet contains knowledge within it. The heart conveys the wisdom of both sound, knowledge, as well as light, revelation from within. We could almost even see it. I'm still working out my understanding, but I can almost see light being knowledge, and then sound being what it means to the specific person. Light is universal, but the sound, each person has to move towards the light of universal truth in a way that befits their soul, their spirit, their self. And that is the true nourishing milk of real self-realization and spiritual wisdom. Now, leading Indra into battle with his inspired wisdom, Brihaspati is intimately yoked with this god of victory, Indra, in several Rigvedic hymns. Here they are known as Devatadvanva, a close-knit set of two devatas, Devatadvanva. And the name of them, when they are together like this, they are called Indra Brihaspati, is one word. If you saw in the book, I wonder if I can convey that. My light's not going to let me, but it's Indra Brihaspati is one word. Now, although seemingly odd battle companions, the members of this two-horse team have much in common. Hello, Irene. My friend Irene Mack is hanging out with us now. We're just going through the Vedic story of Brihaspati, who's the god of Pushya. Thanks for joining us. Now, while Indra and Brihaspati may seem like odd battle companions, the members of this two-horse team have much in common. For example, both devatas possess bravery, evident by Indra's heroic actions, as well as Brihaspati's courageous knowledge. Both use the power and force of thunder as battle weapons. Thunder-armed Indra destroys the Asuras with his 1,000-edged thunderbolt. Brihaspati pierces the veils of ignorance with his thunderous cry. They are both leaders of troops. Indra champions the shrieking Rudras, and Brihaspati the ecstatic chanting Rikvans. This dauntless duo is likened to the king, Indra, and his court priest, Brihaspati, who, when yoked in right purpose, overcome all evil in the kingdom. Good stuff. Once, when the gods refused to acknowledge Indra's right of primogeniture and leadership, Brihaspati performs a sacrifice on Indra's behalf. Henceforth, the gods officially declare such rights as exclusively belonging to Indra. As early as the Aitareya Brahmana, Indra chooses Brihaspati as his guru, due to his excellence in sacrificial worship and his brilliance and his brilliant counsel. And the Aitareya Brahmana is not Vedic, but it is one of the earlier commentaries, Brahmanas, of the Vedic literature. Brihaspati's association with courage and battlefield victory is rarely acknowledged in later Shastras. Yet the ancient Vedic priests entice Brihaspati to the sacrifice by singing praises of his wartime triumphs. Perhaps Brihaspati's spiritual victories explain Tishya, auspicious, as Pushya's ancient appellation. So the word Tishya means auspicious, and it might be Brihaspati's spiritual victories that explain why this nakshatra has been known as Tishya as well. Now we have a quote from the Aitareya Brahmana here. Invitation Brihaspati went, maybe this is just, invitation is in brackets, so maybe it's implied that this is his invitation. So Brihaspati went to Tishya, his nakshatra. He, the best of the gods, the one who is victorious in battles. Let it be security for us in all quarters. And now here's an oblation given in this sense. Let Tishya protect us in front and also in the middle. Let Brihaspati protect us in the rear. Let them both, Brihaspati and Tishya, drive away hostility. Let them give us security. May we become lords of a host of brave men. That comes from Aitareya Brahmana, later in the sutras. Brihaspati's boons in the Yajurveda are not limited to sacred knowledge and victory, but as well include many mundane gifts such as wealth, offspring, and heroes. Now, the next chapter we have is the Brahmanic priestly functions and the nakshatra devatas. It's going to be conveying what the priest exactly means in general as it relates to the yajnas and the Vedic priest symbol in general, which Brihaspati is known for being, Brihaspati being the priest of the devas, including Indra. Now, what we read is that it was not unusual during the Brahmanic period to envision the gods as priests. For the priestly ceremonial roles were considered analogous to certain aspects or characteristics of the devatas. And we have a footnote here which says that in this section, the author embellishes upon and amends the notion of priestly roles and associated devatas introduced by Hillebrandt in his book Vedic Mythology. So that book, Vedic Mythology by Hillebrandt, is where a lot of this is coming from. Although Radha amends it in her own way. Now what we read is, the expertise of the priestly caste is divided among the Rig Veda, the Samaveda, and the Yajurveda. We have a footnote that says the priests are not assigned duties related to the Atharva Veda, for the nature and topics of this Veda differ significantly from the other Vedas. I see. So that's why we only hear that the priest caste means something different in the Rig Veda, the Sama Veda, and the Yajur Veda. The Atharva Veda is not a part of that because of the Atharva Veda is expressing something different. Now, for example of the differences in the Rig Veda, the Sama Veda, and the Yajur Veda, priests knowledgeable in the Rig Veda perform those duties assigned to the Hotri office, and those conversant in the songs of the Sama Veda to the Ugatri office. Similarly, priests schooled in the ways of the Yajur Veda belong to the Advaryu office. Lastly is the Brahman office, arguably the most important of the four, since the priests belonging to this Brahman office must be wise in all three Vedas. Interesting. It's cool to see priest-Brahmin-cased culture, as it was anciently and probably also how it is in a lot of places in India today. Each office consists of a head priest and his 3 assistants. So hence, 16 priests officiate during the Soma Yagna, the most complex and significant of the grand yagnas. If you've been listening to this whole series, you'll continually hear the Soma Yagna as being metaphorical of bringing the Amrita from the whole body of the person, the whole body, mind, and spirit of the person. It relates to the moon, it relates to Amrita, the soul, and to many other metaphorical things symbolized that you can read a little bit more about that in the episode we did on Mrigashirsha. Now, Agni is pronounced the head Hotri priest. The Hotri summons the gods to the sacrifice by reciting their glories as extolled in the hymns of the Rig Veda. The head priest's role is crucial, because if the Hotri priest is unable to entice the gods to the sacrifice, then there is no yagna. As early as the Rig Veda, Agni is seen in this role. The wise invoking priest Agni shall bring all the gods. And that's like one of the earliest mandalas and chapters. That's Mandala 1, chapter 14 of the Rig Veda. And thus Agni will bring hither with speed all the gods. That's Rig Veda, Mandala 1, chapter 44. Now, among the Hotri's assistants is the Maitra Varuna, or Prashistri, a priest who ensures proper speech and action by the other priests. Mitra Varuna, Devatadvanvas of right speech and action, are the obvious choice for this function. So that's Maitra Varuna, is a combination of Mitra and Varuna. The authority and power of the Maitra Varuna is apparent by his sacrificial staff, his danda. The functions allocated to the Advaryu office are rather unique. The Advaryu and his assistants carry out countless exacting sacrificial rites and rituals, as stipulated in the Yajurveda and Brahmanas. Importantly, the Advaryu conducts the principal components of the Soma Yagna, such as measuring the sacrificial grounds, constructing the altar, negotiating the purchase of the Soma stalks, Soma being a plant that was anciently regarded as having the Amrita nectar inside of it. Some say that its DMT is somehow wrapped up in this whole thing. It's an interesting thing to think about. Now, the Advaryu priests also prepare the sacrificial vessels and so on. They do many of these little on-the-ground things. Attending to all physical details, the Advaryu must be manually adept at performing minute sacrificial protocols. Who better deserving for such post than the Ashvins, expert surgeons renowned for their nimble and exacting hands? So as we can see, what's happening here is that there is something called the Soma Yagna, and priests and people they perform the Soma Yagna. But the Soma Yagna is actually a metaphor for something that happens inherently inside of human consciousness, that produces Soma, that produces the mind, that produces imagination, that produces DMT. You know, DMT being what I would call an adjunct to the primary function of consciousness. And what we read here is that we're noting that the priests who physically on planet Earth in ancient Vedic times would do the Soma Yagna were playing the part of what is always happening in every moment of human experience as the divine inherent Soma Yagna that we are constantly living through. If we want to understand Agni's place, who is the god of Kritika, and therefore at some level what the Kritika native is, their karma and dharma are all about, we have to understand that Agni is the Hotri priest who is hosting the Soma Yagna that we are all living through. And Maitra Varuna is the Devatvadvanva that is performing its function as a part of the Soma Yagna. The Ashwins, which is of course, ruled by Ashwini, it's the horse-headed gods, are the ones that are holding the office of the Advaryu. My phone's blowing up because my friend is texting me. Sorry about that, everyone. So the Ashvins, with their expert, nimble and exacting hands, are the ones that do the physical on-the-ground work of the Soma Yagna and preside in us spiritually, doing something similar as well. That's why they're surgeons of the physical body. Very psychedelic. Now, Tvastri and the wives of the gods are declared the Nestri, assistant priest to the Advaryu. A core responsibility of this priest is to orchestrate the conduct of the Yajamana's wife throughout the course of the ceremony. Rarely is a solemn sacrifice performed without the participation of the wife. Interesting. Her mere presence ensures fertility in children, cows, and agriculture. Tvastri, a god of fertility, which rules Chitra Nakshatra, is assigned the Nestri post. For this divine fashioner shapes the form of the unborn child for the wives of the gods and for those of men. Interesting. We know Tvastri is the architect of the gods, as they say. It's psychedelic to think that Tvastri in the Vedas as the architect of the gods might literally have something to do with the simple genetic fact of a human being being sculpted and formed into the human form while it's in the womb. The human body has all the elements of the gods inside of it. It contains this data inherently. Tvastri is that architect. It's a cool thing to think about. Truly, each priestly post is essential in its own way for the attainment of desired sacrificial results on behalf of the Yajamana, the person doing the sacrifice. Yet, as master of ceremonies and an expert in all three Vedas, the Brahman priest is particularly central. Indeed, he is declared the heart of all of the sacrifice. Not surprisingly, Brihaspati, the receptacle of all sacrificial vidya, heeds the all-important office of the Brahman priests. Wow, there's a lot of data being laid down here. It's a little esoteric and thick, but I feel the importance of moving through it. Now, second in command to the Brahman priest is the Brahmana Chamshin, a priest who recites hymns to Indra. The Devatadvandva, Indra Brihaspati, shares this priestly function of second in command to Brihaspati himself as the presider of the Brahman priests, has as his aide and second in command Indra Brihaspati. Now, the Patri, the purifier, also an assistant to the Brahman, is particularly adept at remediating or purifying sacrificial mistakes. The Patri priest is likened to the atmospheric Rudras, who, much like Vayu, are known for their purifying functions. Lastly, worth mentioning is the Subramanya, assistant to the head Udgatri priest. As Indra and the gods partake of the Soma draft, the divine songs of the Samaveda are sung to them by the Subramanya. To perform such elevated honor, this priest must possess an exacting and enchanting voice, one capable of striking the hypnotic notes favored by the gods. Serenading the gods during the Soma offering is Vak, goddess of speech. And Vak is spelt V-A-C. We can also read it as having a K in it. It's interesting because Victor, we're almost cracking into a little bit of something interesting here, because I mentioned earlier in the part of the video, in our Taittiriya Brahmana series video, that Victakara defined Juhvataha partly as resonating with Vak. And Vic didn't give us any explanation of what that word is. Now we see that what Vak is the goddess of speech with an enchanting voice, whose hypnotic notes are favored by the gods. And it shows that melody, sound, tone is like it's like the feminine melodic side of the Vedic Juhvataha, of the ones singing reality and the sacrifice into being. And so part of Juhvataha is not just describing the light of the notes, but also the sweet, seductive, hypnotic sound, right? Because again, this is light and sound coming into union. Not just knowledge, but also the sweetness of the heart combined into one. That's what Vak represents. Very cool. That's at least my interpretation of what Vic gave us in that little enigmatic clue. Now let's keep moving forward here, folks. Next chapter, we have Brihaspati's Puranic lineage. And so, what is Brihaspati in the Puranas, in the New Testament of Vedic literature? Brihaspati is the son of Angiras, initiator of an exalted line of fire priests, and Rishi of Rig Veda Mandala 6. Skilled in the knowledge of sorcery, Angiras also authored the Atharva Veda. Angiras also authored the Atharva Veda Abhikaras, which are magical spells, consisting of spells and curses against demonic forces, possession of spirits, and witchery-induced illnesses and mishaps. We have a footnote that says, such methods are not dissimilar from the shamanic practices employed in many ancient cultures or exorcisms performed by a select group of Catholic priests. Interesting. Now, it was not uncommon for priestly lineages to have expert knowledge in such areas. It appears that as the son of Angiras, Brihaspati is likewise schooled in such matters. For example, in the Ramayana, Brihaspati restores life to the dead with his magical spells. Interesting. Now, with the introduction of the caste system, Brihaspati is charged with oversight of the Brahmin caste, who are the domestic priests. Most curiously, he's also noted for his expertise in Arthashastra, the science of government, an ancient treatise on statecraft, economic policy, and military strategy. All of this comes from the Vishnu Purana, Book 11, Chapter 6. Early in its development, Arthashastra attempted to integrate the spiritual values and ethical standards of Brahmanism with the political requirements of kingly rulership. Interesting. Hence, as overseer of the priestly caste, Brihaspati's perspective contributed greatly to this science. Brihaspati's son is Bharadvaja, who, like his grandfather, is a principal contributor to Rig Veda Mantala 6. Bharadvaja is also renowned for his knowledge and instruction in Arthashastra. Brihaspati's most popular Puranic tale recounts the embarrassing seduction of his wife Tara by the moon, resulting in the Tarakamaya Samgrama, which is the war on account of Tara. We can see more about that on the chapter on Mrigashira, which relates to Soma. In this tale, the moon is undeniably at fault for having seduced Tara in the first place, and so is Tara for having succumbed to the delights of the moon. But Brihaspati is not without blame. His vow of celibacy was taking a toll on Tara. And we read a quote. Brihaspati, intently and with self-control, led in a proper manner that life of austerities which a Brahmana leads. He gave up pleasure and controlled his senses, and thereby attained the position of the preceptor of the celestials. That actually comes from the Mahabharata, interestingly. Now, Tara and the moon eventually gave birth to a charming and playful baby boy called Buddha, which in the Vedic astronomical and astrological literature means Mercury. Buddha is represented by Mercury. It's almost like the name is shared between the planet Mercury and its birth creation story as intelligence, true creative intelligence. And the name of the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, the historical figure that we know who started Buddhism, just happens to have the same name. We could say that Buddha, the historical Gautama Buddha who created Buddhism, applied Mercury in order to come into his enlightenment. Now, after much ado, Brihaspati agrees to rear Buddha as his own, providing another explanation for the name Pushya, which means to foster, to rear, to nourish. Another well-known legend in the Puranas is prefaced on the endless rivalry between Brihaspati, here portrayed as the planet Jupiter and Purahita to the gods, and Shukracharya, the planet Venus, who is Purohita to the Asuras. This is one of my favorite aspects of Vedic literature. It's the wisdom of Jupiter versus the wisdom of Venus. I love the stories of these two together. As recounted in the Matsya Purana, the demons had been conquered in battle repeatedly by the gods. Concerned for their longevity as a race, the Asuras approach Guru Shukracharya, Venus. He assures the demons that through austerities, he will acquire the power to make them immortal. So hastily, Shukracharya, Venus, heads off to the forest to perform just such austerities. Now Indra gets wind of Shukracharya, Venus's whereabouts, and sends his lovely daughter Jayanti for a visit, hoping to distract the celibate guru. As expected, Shukracharya is easily lured from his austerities and consents to Jayanti's request to be her husband for a period of 10 years. With that mission accomplished, Indra next pays a visit to Brihaspati, updating him on the latest news of the universe. He convinces Brihaspati to assume the form of Shukracharya and pose as the Asuras' Purahita. The unsuspecting demons worship Brihaspati faithfully. Wow. After 10 years, Shukracharya leaves Jayanti, only to find Brihaspati has tricked his demons. Now being furious, Shukracharya demands their allegiance. But the demons are dumbfounded as to who is the real Shukracharya. Deciding that it must surely be Brihaspati, they chase Shukracharya away. Disgusted, not to mention mortified, Shukracharya curses the demons that they will soon be destroyed. Hearing the curse, Brihaspati assumes his original form. The demons suddenly realize that not only were they duped by Brihaspati, now they are doomed by Shukracharya's curse as well. You know, there's a very interesting, just a very interesting metaphor going on there for Jupiter being the spiritual, superconscious devata priest, and Shukracharya, Venus, being the priest of the Asuras, and the kind of entanglements that cause the Asuras, who are ultimately these beings with their own autonomy and sovereignty in the human being. You know, you need to trick the Asuras, because the Asuras have appetites, and you can't just ignore those appetites inside of the human body. So the way that it happens is that Shukracharya, the Venus inside of all of us, what's Venus represent? It represents marriage. When you are married to a wife, or when a wife is married to a husband, there is a marriage happening there where the Asuras inside of the two still get to be expressed through their lover. And the energy is generated to share with each other, but is still ultimately sublimated because Brihaspati is ruling the Asuras at that point, when there is true dedication to the marriage and to the love that is shared between the two. So the Asura nature still gets to get itself out. The sexual nature, the erotic nature, the desire for sensuality, luxury, ease, even maybe not laziness, but something akin to it. Relaxation, Saturn, rest, earthy luxury and wealth and living abundantly. And again, the erotic. This is all Venus stuff. And it's when you have a dedicated marriage, Brihaspati can tug on the Asuras and actually lull the Asuras into the truer, deeper dharmas and the purifications that the devas and the higher chakras convey. This is a way to channel the lower chakras into the higher chakras without cutting them completely. You got to trick them through marriage, which is a beautiful, awesome metaphorical story. Very cool. Now, we've discussed the Taittiriya Brahmana sutras, and, eventually I'm going to have split these two videos. So there's the Taittiriya Brahmana sutras video about Pushya Nakshatra natives, and then we've also done a video discussing Brihaspati in the Vedas through the divine forces of the lunar nakshatras. Now, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between, the next thing we're going to be moving through, this is again coming from the divine forces of the lunar nakshatras as portrayed in the Vedas by Radha. We've discussed Brihaspati. Now we're going to get further information of the astrology of a native with a particular emphasis of Pushya Nakshatra. This is most typically conveyed as having the moon in Pushya, but this can also mean the Lagna in Pushya. This can mean the Lagna Lord in Pushya. And as well, this can mean any planet as being a lord of any house. If you've got the second lord in Pushya, it's going to mean a certain thing. If you've got the sixth lord, if you've got the 11th lord in Pushya, Pushya Nakshatra is going to express the tones of that lord in different ways. And that's what we're going to kind of read through a little bit here. Now, this author tends to do a very good job of conveying her interpretation of the lords inside of this nakshatra, as well as especially the moon and the Lagna. Really anyone with any strong emphasis of this nakshatra. And we have to keep in mind that this author of this book, Radha, she is herself a sidereal practitioner. So I'm going to be wary, and I'm going to try to mention when I see that her interpretation of the Pushya native can sometimes carry with it the idea that that Cancer is inherently combined with the symbolism of Pushya, because that is the understanding of the sidereal astrologers, is that the nakshatras are married to their signs. Us tropical astrologers don't necessarily jive to that. And so we have to be careful to be discerning when there might be distortion in what we read here. Usually this author's pretty good. So I'm going to keep my eye out and see if I feel anything like that happening. But just keep in mind as we read this that the character of Pushya native that she is portraying here might betray some of that unnecessary association of Cancer with Pushya. Even though Pushya at present is at the tail end of Cancer, we can't necessarily say that it's fully correlated there as tropical astrologers. So I digress. Even if you're a sidereal astrologer, you should still get something out of this. This is the Pushya native. Of the 27 lunar nakshatras, Pushya is one of the most auspicious from a spiritual perspective. It imparts in its native devout interest in the sacred and profound curiosity about the higher meaning of life. Lofty subjects such as theology, philosophy, metaphysics, and world religions intrigue the Pushya native. In Jyotisha texts and texts about ancient Indian astrology and astronomy, Pushya is associated with Shastra initiation, as well as educational endeavors. That comes from Muhurta Chintamani. Now, should the nodes of the moon occupy Pushya, here's something useful for us. If the nodes of the moon occupy Pushya, you should expect more eccentric, although potentially still sacred, initiations into Vedic literature and thought and energy. For example, the native might have a fascination with the archaic sciences of witchcraft, sorcery, shamanism, or the left-hand path of Tantra. Now, as we've read, we've gone through the character of Brihaspati in Vedic literature, and what we note is that Brihaspati's father is Angiras, who authored the magical spells of the Atharva Veda. So Brihaspati, the lord of this nakshatra, himself was known to work with magic. So especially having Ketu or Rahu in Pushya, there might be some inclinations towards exploring these esoteric, subtle, supernatural, superconscious aspects of human consciousness. Now, we read here, let's see. Now, the author is giving us an illustration of someone named Alice Bailey, who had the Lagna. Oh no, I can't use this. The author's giving us an example here that would only work with sidereal astrology, so I'm not going to speak to it here. Now, another foremost quality of Pushya, remember Pushya means to nourish. Another foremost quality of Pushya natives is an innate desire to support, nourish, and foster others. It's really what the guru is doing, is fostering the best inside of their student. So implications for the Pushya native include a decidedly maternal disposition, a motherly disposition, one which is likely to influence his vocation of choice. Perhaps the person is a professional caretaker, a nurse, a doctor, a chef, or even a dairy farm owner. Remember, the Brihaspati also has an association with cows. So somebody who is a farmer taking care of many cows and animals has Pushya kind of written in it. So this maternal caretaking nature might play into the career and character and career objectives anyway of someone with Pushya emphasis. I got a hair that's itching me. Now, Pushya also translates as to flower, meaning to blossom or to cause to flourish. Brihaspati cultivates his students by teaching the vidya, the vision, the truth of the Vedas. Brihaspati's teachings help students develop into wise, discerning, and spiritually productive individuals. Pushya Nakshatra encourages its native to do just the same. depending upon the overall chart terrain. Such energy is likely expressed through a career as a personal coach, a spiritual counselor, a teacher, or a professor. Perhaps the native is even an advisor to distinguished people. It's presidents, CEOs, chief political figures, or religious heads are the type of people that this person might counsel. After all, Brihaspati was the advisor to the gods themselves. We could really see this with the Lagna, with the moon, and also particular career things, obviously. If someone's MC, if someone's midheaven falls into the nakshatra Pushya, we can expect there to be some emphasis of this going on there in their career. Now, things can go awry for afflicted or exaggerated planets in Pushya. For example, under the right chart conditions, a Jupiter that is exalted here, mind you, it's specifically considered in Vedic astrology that an exaltation of a planet happens mostly in a certain part of the sign. For example, Jupiter is mostly exalted at around 0 to 5 degrees of Cancer, where Pushya is not. But it's still, most people would still consider that Jupiter at anywhere in Cancer still carries an exaltation energy to it, as well as delighted by the moon, its friend. So what we read is that a Jupiter that's in Cancer, that is under the right conditions, it's like Jupiter that's in Cancer, but still, whether it's got trines from its enemies, Mercury and Venus, or whether it has other illnesses, if it's in the 7th house where it's not as happy, if it's got ill Vimshopak, it's got ill Shadbala, all these different things. An exaggerated yet afflicted Jupiter in Pushya is capable of instilling a know-it-all attitude that offers literal tolerance for the thoughts and opinions of others. Similarly, we read that if extremist Rahu occupies Pushya, the native may be fanatical in their beliefs, venturing far beyond the boundaries of societal norms. Now, Mars being debilitated in Cancer can be emotionally charged about his ideals if Mars is in Pushya in Cancer. One might picture a passionately overzealous preacher or missionary, someone who is acting on the wisdom of Pushya, but the Mars, again, is not discerning enough to clarify, to discern. So it's lazy in how it expresses a martial energy about Pushya. Now, what we read is that Clint Eastwood has Pushya moon. We also see that that moon is aspected by Mars in his chart. Clint Eastwood's popularity as an actor exploded with his role as Harry Callahan in the 5 Dirty Harry films. Clintwood's role Clintwood, that does say Clintwood, but it's supposed to say Clint Eastwood's role as Callahan is an example of the extremes that Pushya is capable of going to in the name of righteousness. Callahan, the character Callahan, is a badass cop who never hesitates to cross professional and ethical boundaries in pursuit of his own vision of justice. It's like a vigilante type of consciousness. Empire Online describes Callahan's character. Callahan is a shoot first, ask questions later type of guy, a bit of a pervert and a massive racist to boot. This is Pushya kind of gone to extremes. However, under optimal chart conditions, Pushya's divine, deva, and dharmic inclinations as stipulated by Jyotisha Shastra, as a planet's going well in Pushya, can instead produce an individual whose focus is on humanitarian issues or spiritual ideals of great concern to the world. Now, there's an example of someone here. Exemplary of this pristine potential is Srila B.R. Sridhar Maharaja. And this is someone who had the moon and Jupiter in Pushya. The divine Sridhar Maharaja founded the Sri Caitanya Saravasta Mata, an Indian temple dedicated to the devotion of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu and Lord Krishna. A vast library of his discourses and teachings formed the basis of books such as the Srimad Bhagavatam Gita, The Hidden Treasure of the Sweet Absolute, The Search for Sri Krishna, Reality of the Beautiful, and many more. Cool. Now, the responsibility to protect and conserve the Brahmin caste rests solely upon the shoulders of the character Brihaspati. Plus, Brihaspati is deeply vested in the cause, as his own exalted ranking is dependent upon it. The Brahmin caste represents the established sacred order of society. It's a social stratum with exclusive rights to the secret teachings of the Vedas. Its very existence mandates the exclusion of those who would come and taint and distort Vedic knowledge and literature. The Brahmin caste is also responsible for preserving wisdom from one generation to the next. These are all the good, ideal sides of the Brahmin caste, even though it itself can deteriorate in the annals of time due to human ignorance. The Brahmins established schools for instructing young boys in the Vedas and the ways of the yajna, the spiritual sacrifice. So thus, Pushya is cloaked in that ancient wisdom with its rites and rituals. So the native may actually actively participate in a secret society with its own language and arcane rites. This can mean the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, or the Hare Krishnas, interestingly. In a more mundane chart, perhaps the native is a member of a club catering to the higher echelons of society, such as the Harvard Club, the Norwood Jewish Club, or New York's Core Club. Alternately, under different chart conditions, the native may be an activist for the preservation and protection of various societal groups, whose culture and ancient traditions are at risk of extinction. An example of this, and I think this is a great example this author gives, is the Native Americans. Somebody could be in Pushya, learn the ways of the Native American peoples, and be someone who is very intent on helping to continue to sustain the beautiful and important wisdom of the Native American peoples. Dope. For any Pushya people who are doing that, keep it going. But I get it, the natives of this nakshatra would be interested in continuing almost extinct ancient knowledges of various sorts. It should be noted that the function of the priest is highly ritualistic, mandating the execution of hundreds of thousands of rites and rituals. Each rite requires exacting perfection. Even a single mispronounced word or erroneously performed action can thwart the efficacy of the sacrifice. Hence, it's not unusual to find a perfectionist streak in this native, someone who's very used to getting something, doing it a million times, and mastering it profoundly, which can make for great actors, memorizing lines, performers of things that involve vocals, etc. Now, lording over an entire societal caste, as well as the singing Rikvans of the Vedas, Brihaspati possesses stellar leadership skills and as well is adept in Arthashastra, which is political science. This is politics. This is people who endeavor to be important leaders in a community, important voices in a community. So this native may express a strong interest in governmental leadership positions, economic policy setting, or public administration. Of course, the native might simply prefer the profession of choir master, somebody who just likes to lead the music of a choir, or leading groups of people in general, similar to Indra. Now, lastly, mention should be made of the familial life of Brihaspati, the family life. As a devoted Brahmin, Brihaspati takes a vow of celibacy. This results in his wife Tara's discontent. She feels unloved. She feels like she can't get into the tantra and the embodied sensuality of woman. And so a very public affair happens between Tara, Brihaspati's wife, and Chandra, who's the signifier of the moon in the ancient Vedas. A variety of conjugal drama leading to public embarrassment can be possible for Pushya Native, because they can be so focused on their spiritual austerity that they neglect to deal with what is happening with their wife. And this could be the same vice versa for a woman with Pushya qualities who misses out on that quality inside herself. Family and friends tend to get embroiled in such events and help exaggerate the drama by actively and vocally choosing sides. Perhaps the drama even makes front-page news or results in an ugly courtroom battle. And this is the Tarakamaya Samgrama, that story of the priest who had a wife, didn't care for his wife's emotional and sensual needs, and so she went and had an affair. And it was a big sociological thing. So, in a chart with fewer indications for publicity or notoriety, it could simply be that the spouse of the Pushya native never quite lives up to the lofty ideals and morals that they try to espouse, causing disillusionment with the institution of marriage. Interesting how marriage, austerity, commitment, devotion, truly, ultimately, how I feel is that if this native has Pushya emphasis in their chart and they abide by Tantra, by the essential needs of their lover while abiding within themselves, maintaining boundaries, maintaining communication, but also listening to their bodies. I'm a tantric person. I'm somebody who leans towards the austerity aspect of things, but I listen, the light of austerity, I feel it should be balanced with the sound of what is happening inside the human nervous system. Its desire for peace, for even eros, for sensuality, for enjoyment. I believe they can be mended together. And there's a great story that we tell in the video of Brihaspati that's in this series, where Venus, as the character that's called Shukracharya, Venus is the priest of the asuras, which is the demons of the flesh and the genotypes of the human physical body, and the emotional needs, the lower chakras. Venus rules the lower chakras. Jupiter is the priest of the higher chakras. And Jupiter, the priest of the higher chakras, can't eliminate the asuras. Instead, he wants to use their energy and sublimate it through the higher chakras. But the only way you're going to sublimate the lower chakras into the higher chakras is by tuning into the lower chakras. So there's a cool story that happens where Brihaspati, with Indra tricks Venus for Jupiter, who is Brihaspati. Indra tricks Venus, who's the priest of the lower chakras, by sending a woman to be Shukracharya's wife. And Shukracharya is so enamored by this wife, he's supposed to go and do some austerities. And he is tricked into becoming the husband of a woman. And by being the husband of a woman, Brihaspati secretly goes, and while Venus of the lower chakras is distracted with a wife, Brihaspati steals the attention of the asuras and sublimates it into the higher chakras. So having a wife, having a marriage partner can be a great way to still apply the sensuality, but you're doing it for love, for the Krishna inside your lover. You're doing it out of a sacrifice, to continue the sacrifice by enjoying the sublimated bliss of each other's lower chakras, ultimately trying to tune it so that you can sublimate it and bring it up to the higher chakras for both your sake. Because all aspects of the human body are divine, but they need to be orchestrated in a divine way by austerity mixed with compassion. And this is again Ganapati, the light and sound, finding harmony in the center. That's my rather tantric take on this, because ultimately I think someone with Pushya Nakshatra, while they may be inclined to be an austere person, an austere soul is still in the same boat as all of us, having physical needs as well as emotional needs, as well as mental needs, as well as spiritual needs. And everybody can find that balance, because the self in one is the self in all. You might have some part of your character that needs to play through. Maybe you want to be more austerity driven than sensual driven. And so you need to apply this priest-like connection to brahmacharya, to a contained awareness of your sensual energies. And that might be right for you. That might be right for some people. But don't go thinking that just because you're Pushya native, that it's universally going to be right for you. You need to explore it yourself. And especially find guidance on the matter. Find somebody who will talk with you about it, talk you through it, and help you realize within yourself how you ought to best approach sexuality on your path to being an austere practitioner of the Vedas. So, I hope everybody has enjoyed that. That was coming from the divine forces of the lunar nakshatras, as portrayed in the Vedas by the author Radha. I always love doing this stuff with you guys. I've had a few folks hanging out with me live. Irene Mack, Mary Madeline, Teresa, Amber Patrick. This has been a great time as usual, folks. I love conveying this stuff with you. I love just talking about the Vedas. And I feel very blessed to be able to move through it by my own passion. And it's nice to be heard and seen by you guys as well. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you enjoyed this. Let me know if that felt good to hear and read about what we've just gone through. I'm Dustin Cormier for How to Rock Astrology. Stay in touch with me, folks, because somewhere along the line, we're going to go through all these nakshatras one way or the other. That is my stated plan. Thanks for watching. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of your night, and I'll see you guys in the next live stream. Take care.